Have you ever read a tax case? I'd say you likely know of tax cases from your studies, but have never read a full transcript. And you'd be in the majority. Tax case law is hugely valuable but underrated. Understand 5 reasons why you should use case law more than you do now from this episode 65 of the Tax Professionals podcast.
Welcome to the Tax Professionals podcast, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your tax career. Here's your host, Jack Bonehill.
Hi and welcome to this episode of the Tax Professionals podcast. As I'm recording this, it's a few days after Christmas. I've had a few full days off from work, podcast and anything else work related, which has just been great because it's been really needed. It's been so busy on the lead up to Christmas and I've not been able to prepare for this episode earlier, so here we are. But it's not all doom and gloom. I'm grateful for the podcast and all the things I'll be doing next year because of it. So far, I'll be delivering my Tax Research Masterclass in Feb 2022, doing 2 to 4 professional school sessions with the CIOT, hopefully doing a webinar with MBL seminars and doing 2 webinars with CPD Store. I believe the ones I'm doing with the CIOT will be offered for free by the CIOT, as long as you're a CIOT member. So if you're tight with money, like I am, then keep an eye out for these ones at least. Back in October, I was presenting my Tax Research Masterclass over Zoom and I asked attendees which part they were looking forward to most. I'd spent ages creating the parts on how to use legislation well. Probably around a third of the masterclass was on this because I was convinced that this is what people would want to hear about the most, that and how to find relevant information. But as I saw the responses come in, to my surprise, a good handful of people were most looking forward to the parts on case law. And then when we did get to the part on case law, I had some questions that I just was not expecting. There was just a lot of interest and I wasn't expecting this. So I ended up covering a lot more than I initially intended just because of the questions that were being asked by people. But this experience made me realise that many tax professionals have little, if no experience of using tax case law. And I'm hoping to change that with this episode. I want to encourage you and other tax professionals to use it more than you currently do and get stuck into the tax world. There's so much value in every tax case. You will touch upon case law in your law CBE, so I'm not going to go into detail on what it is here. But basically, for tax, case law is when a taxpayer and HMRC can't agree on a tax position and so they go to a tribunal or other court in order for them to do a court ruling on the tax position based on a set of facts. And where there's a full transcript of the case, you can usually see the arguments put forward by both parties as well as the court's conclusion with justifications. So if a taxpayer was saying that Y tax was due and HMRC was saying X tax was due, the court will rule and say which one's right if it agrees with one of the sides, or if something different completely, then it can rule that too, potentially. If you like this episode and are interested in tax research more generally, then there's plenty of other episodes I think you'll like too, like episode 60, where 3 tax professionals share their tips to help you get better at tax research. There are links to all these episodes in the show notes for this episode at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP65. The show notes also include a link to the Tax Research Masterclass, which will enable you to develop practical tax research skills, and that's being delivered in Feb 2023. Rough timings for each section of the episode can be found within the detail section of the episode within your podcast player of choice, or by heading on over to the show notes for this episode. The only link you'll need to remember from this episode is the link for the show notes, which is thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP65. This is the only link you'll need to remember because all other links that I mentioned throughout this episode will be included within there. If, like me, you're interested in knowing what you're worth in terms of salary, then get in touch with James from the Tax Recruitment Company to benchmark what you're currently on. From his interaction with many different businesses and tax professionals, he has current knowledge of salary rates based on experience and specialism. Speaking with James could help you negotiate a pay rise or determine it's time to find a new role. Contact details for James can be found in the show notes for this episode, or you can book a chat with him by heading on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/salary chat. So get in touch with James to benchmark your salary or discuss potentially available roles, particularly if you work in corporation tax, as he's currently recruiting for many roles in this area. Without further ado, let's get to the episode. So benefit number 1. The case law can be very useful in improving a client's or taxpayer's position during an HMRC inquiry. Back in my first tax job, the tax partner called me into his office and was telling me that HMRC wanted to basically stick a memory stick into a client's computer and extract a bunch of data from it. And the partner was adamant that HMRC were not allowed to do this under their legal powers. And so he asked me to find some case law to be able to basically show HMRC that they're not able to do this. And so I went away and I had to actually Google what case law was at this point because I didn't know what it was. But I went away and found a bunch of different tax cases to do with what HMRC is and isn't able to do in terms of gathering information and documentation from a taxpayer, etc. So during that research, I found cases that basically justified that HMRC were not able to stick a memory stick onto a client's computer and extract all the information that they wanted from it. They didn't have the power to do that. And I found that out through doing case law research. And then the partner was able to put an argument forward to HMRC and say, you're not able to do this. And then HMRC backed down. So that left the taxpayer, our clients, in a much better position than they would have been if we didn't do that. And the reason we were able to put forward the arguments that we did was because of the tax law research, was because of the tax case law research. So as well as doing kind of what we talked about there, which is stopping HMRC from acting outside of their powers, making sure that they're acting within them, you can use case law to put forward alternative views to HMRC's. So HMRC will usually be putting forward an argument which is detrimental to the client, and we as the client's advisors will want to put forward more beneficial views and alternatives to HMRC's. And a typical one of this is where HMRC is saying that a tax rule applies so that a certain amount of tax is due, or that a deduction or something similar doesn't apply, so more tax is due. And basically you can use case law to help substantiate an argument that HMRC then agrees with and then doesn't collect a certain amount of tax from the client, which is obviously great for them. With case law, it's all about finding a case that has similar circumstances to the case that you're looking at now in the present. And where you can find a case that's very similar or identical, if that ever actually happens, then you can use that to say, well, if a court ruled this in the first case, then in our case that we're looking at now, then the court should also rule the same because they're so similar or identical. There's no way that you can come to a different conclusion. But case law anyway is very good in helping you to improve a client's or taxpayer's position during a HMRC inquiry, making sure that they act within their powers as an example, and also putting forward more beneficial arguments for a client. There might be other uses that you can find for case law during HMRC inquiries, but these are the two that seem to crop up time and time again. So benefit number 2. Tax case law allows you to provide better support to clients and taxpayers. So this is on top of the one that we just talked about, which is putting a client in a better position during a HMRC inquiry. But when it comes to using case law, it allows you to provide more certainty to a client when you're providing them with advice, which will just be good in lowering a client's risk and I suppose giving them a better service, because clients, generally speaking, do not want like greys. They don't want it could be this, it could be this, it could be that. They want you to tell them that this is the answer, because that is just better for them. They like certainty. The way it can help when providing advice, for example, is if your clients come to you with a certain kind of fact pattern, set of circumstances, and they need to know what the tax outcome is of that, then if you can find a tax case that has similar facts to them and is relevant in the circumstances, then you can say you can then give advice based on that case and you can say something to the client like, well, this case was very similar to yours and this is what a court ruled was the answer, and so we can say fairly confidently that the same outcome would happen in your case. So now I'll keep coming back to the word certainty, but it does obviously give more certainty to the client than if you just turn around and said, well, this is the legislation and it's a bit ambiguous and it could be this and it could be that, and we can't really be sure. And if you can turn around and go, well, the legislation does seem ambiguous and does seem grey, but a tax court ruled this in this case and your facts are similar, it seems more likely that this would be the outcome. That is obviously much more useful, practical beneficial to the client than just giving them ambiguity and potential outcomes. It's also good for getting more details on HMRC's current views for kind of cases that have come out fairly recently, and this allows you to provide better support to clients because you can turn around to a client and say, well, this is HMRC's view on these facts, and if you apply the result that HMRC thinks is right, then they're not going to challenge it. So that could be good for a client that wants to have a low risk profile when it comes to tax. You might be thinking, well, doesn't HMRC's guidance provide their views on what the tax outcomes would be in certain circumstances? And the answer to that is, well, yes, it does. But a lot of the time, HMRC guidance is fairly basic and low level. And case law can give you a lot more detail around these things and more of an insight. And there might be things put forward by HMRC in a case that are not within their guidance because they have been unable to publish that guidance for whatever reason. That does happen from time to time. And so you can get more details on their views through tax cases. On top of that, where there's current cases, tax case law will be able to give you insights into the areas that HMRC are likely to be interested in at the moment, and therefore you can talk to your clients in relation to those areas to make sure that their risks are mitigated properly and that they're doing things correctly and so on. The reason cases give you an insight into where HMRC are likely to be interested is because on the back of a case that HMRC wins and gets a result that they want, they often do campaigns on the back of this. So in the area that I work in, employment taxes, there was a case, I think about 3 years ago now, in relation to what's known as the managed service company rules. And since then, HMRC has started a lot of other inquiries in relation to looking into the managed service company rules, because HMRC want to apply those rules and gather tax on the back of it. So current cases will give you an idea of where HMRC is currently interested so that you can make sure that your clients are ready, I suppose, for HMRC inquiry in those areas, they're doing things right, etc., so that their risk is mitigated, or if they don't want to mitigate their risk and they want to take the risk, then they can continue doing what they're doing, but with the knowledge at least that it's an area that HMRC is likely to contest and is looking into a lot at present. It could also be helpful with clearance applications, for example, if you want to get clearance from HMRC to get them to agree a tax outcome with you, and if you can use cases and put forward arguments based on cases, then HMRC could be more likely to accept a clearance application. So just as a quick recap then, benefit 2 is that tax case law allows you to provide better support to clients and taxpayers because it can give you more certainty when providing the advice that the client has more certainty. It can give you more details on HMRC's current views, and it can also give you insights into other areas, and it can also give you insights into areas that HMRC are likely to be interested in presently. There's lots of other reasons case law allows you to provide a better client service, by the way, but these are just some of the ones that are coming to mind now. Just a reminder to benchmark your salary, find out what you're worth, or discuss available tax roles, get in contact with James at the Tax Recruitment Company. Contact details are in the show notes at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP65 or book a call with him via thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/salary chat. Benefit number 3. So tax case law is an excellent way, in my view, to improve your tax technical skills and ability. So what do I mean by technical skills and ability? To me at least, technical skills and ability is all about being able to find the tax outcome or tax impact in certain circumstances through basically doing tax research. So this would include interpreting legislation and guidance and case law. It would include analysing these things, and it will also include making conclusions based on the facts and circumstances that you have in front of you. All those things are tax technical skills and ability to me. And using tax case law can help you improve basically in all of these areas because it can help you get better at interpreting legislation and guidance. It can help you get better at analysing legislation and guidance. It can help you become better at making conclusions based on the facts and the guidance and legislation that you've found. And it can also help you to identify legislation as well. The reasons that I think tax case law is so good for helping you get better in all these areas is because within a case itself, in the written transcripts, there's usually a lot of detail within there. And whilst the transcripts, there's no kind of set rules as to what goes into a transcript, usually you get like an analysis of the law, you get an application of the law along with, you get an application of the law with the facts in the case that's been looked at, and you also get conclusions. So you get to see an analysis of the law based on the taxpayer's position. So the barrister and legal people that are representing the taxpayer, you'll get to see their analysis of the law. You'll get to see HMRC's analysis of the law, again, done by their legal people, barristers, etc. You'll then get to see kind of how they're applying that law with the facts based on both sides again. So you'll get the taxpayer's application of the law to the facts, and you'll get HMRC's application of the law with the facts. And then you'll get both sides' conclusions as well based on what they think the outcome is based on the application of the law with those facts. Seeing what's in people's minds on paper in relation to the analysis, application, conclusions, etc. will help you to understand their views, which will help you make your own views, it will help you interpret it yourself, etc. and so on. And so on top of having the taxpayers and HMRC's side, you'll also have the judges' sides, and sometimes they will agree with the taxpayer or HMRC, and sometimes they might disagree with both and come to their own conclusion. Anyway, there are times, by the way, that they can end up coming to the same conclusion, but just with different justifications to, say, the taxpayer or HMRC. So to me, being able to see different arguments put forward, etc., seeing how people are interpreting all these things, to me is just like invaluable information, because I think it's invaluable even more so if you were to, let's say, just have a look at the facts of the case first and then do your own tax research to find the relevant legislation, do your own application of the law to the facts and come to your own conclusions, and then compare against the ones that are in that case. You can then almost like get instant feedback and get to see alternative views, maybe different to your own, etc. And when it comes to doing all of these things, having the ability to look at some legislation or guidance, etc., from lots of different angles is a really useful skill, because then you can get ready to like counter other people's arguments, etc. And I just see things from a more rounded perspective. A recap of this benefit 3. So tax case law is an excellent way to improve your tax technical skills and ability by just reading them. And if you want to be more involved, like kind of what I've talked about there, you can just look at the facts yourself. You can then identify the legislation. You can then apply the legislation based with those facts, and then you can come to your own conclusions and compare to the judges. And that's I suppose a little trick to help you really get a lot of value from cases. And I would even say, if you can, getting into a habit of reading some recent tax cases could be a really good idea for you. So Taxation magazine, for example, always has these little summaries in of recent tax cases. And so you can read the little summaries, and then if you see a case that's going to be relevant to, say, your work area or the area of tax that you work in, then you can go and look at the full transcript. So some transcripts are huge, like 30 plus, 50 plus pages in some really complicated and big cases. But there are some cases where they're like 10 pages, which are much more kind of digestible. So if you find some small ones, reading them won't take much time at all. Obviously the big ones do take a long time, and if you can read them, great. But usually you can get away with a summary for most cases until you need to do something really in-depth with it. So for those big ones, you might want to just wait until there's a circumstance where it's relevant for you to read the full tax case. But just having the awareness of them anyway in the first place is a good thing, because then when a circumstance crops up, you might think, oh, well, I remember seeing something about this case. I'll go and have a look in more detail, see if it's relevant, see if it can help. And that, again, is something that can be useful. Benefit number 4. So tax case law is a relatable and practical way to increase your tax technical knowledge. So I know a lot of people like to learn through kind of real life examples and just examples more generally. And I get why, because you can see how something is applied straight away. It's not just theory, it's actually real life, it's real world, it's live. So tax cases, particularly current tax cases, are a great way for you to kind of build your tax knowledge and see it being applied in practice as well. So topical and recent cases will probably be better for this because, well, they're the most up-to-date, they're relevant, they're what people's views and arguments would be as they are today. It's using tax rules as they are today, not a case that's from, say, 30 years ago where the tax legislation is now different to what it was then. And usually you can find some like smaller cases, which I was talking about earlier, which are like 10-ish pages, which are not that bad to read actually. And the reason I think it's a good way to kind of increase and gain your technical knowledge is because it goes into so much detail usually, or a lot more detail than you would if you were just reading legislation or guidance, say, or someone telling you that this is the rule. When you have a tax rule and you kind of almost like rip it apart and look at it from every single angle, I just think it sticks better, so you'll remember it better. And to me, that going in depth and detail is what makes you understand it properly. And as soon as you understand something, at least for me anyway, it makes me just remember it much more easy, because then rather than trying to remember every little bit, I can almost like figure it out myself if I understand. And one of the things I think a lot of people in tax find difficult, particularly earlier on in their career, is actually taking a rule and applying it to a different circumstance or a different scenario that they've not seen before. And if you literally just learn, say, the basics of a tax rule, I don't know, something like, oh, this is what the outcome is in this case, then you might not be able to look at a different case and go, well, actually, this fact is different, and so it changes the outcome in this way. Whereas going in depth, like you would by reading tax cases, will allow you to understand, like, how one fact changing could impact the conclusion, maybe, or at least that you can figure it out yourself. On top of that, anyway, the smaller cases are fairly bite-sized anyway, so it's small and it's I think anyway, a pretty good way to increase your tax knowledge because it's relatable, it's practical, you're seeing it in practice, and I know for a lot of people that's really good. So benefit number 5, the last and final benefit that I'm going to give you in today's episode. So tax cases take your tax research to the next level. So why is that? Well, you probably already know that there's a lot of legislation and tax rules out there that are ambiguous and where HMRC can come to a different conclusion than, say, you or someone else can. That's the whole reason we have so many cases in tax tribunals, and there's a huge backlog is because there's a lot of ambiguity in tax legislation. And the beauty of tax cases is that they help to remove some of that ambiguity, as we talked about earlier, because if there is, say, some tax legislation where it's almost like a 50-50, what does it mean, and this is the outcome, if you've got a tax case that has the same facts as the ones that you're looking at and trying to figure out the answer for, then you can say, well, the facts are the same or similar, and therefore this is the conclusion. So it removes some of that ambiguity, it gives more certainty. On top of that, it can aid your interpretation of legislation and can give more certainty. And so there's lots of places where you can get aids for interpretation, different views, etc., because you can, say, look in tax books, you can look at articles that people have written, you can even look at HMRC guidance. But I suppose the problem with HMRC guidance is that it's their interpretation, and usually it's going to be in their favour, whereas a tax case it should be completely impartial anyway, so no kind of bias towards either side, and so you're going to more likely get an impartial view, which is obviously better because it's not biased by HMRC's view, which their guidance would be. And the thing with a case is, as we've kind of alluded to, well, as we mentioned already, if you find a case that's very similar, then it can give you a lot of confidence in terms of what the outcome is. It can also be a pretty good way, actually, to find the legislation in the first place. So going back to the example I gave earlier where I got asked to do some case law research to basically justify that HMRC couldn't come in and extract information directly from a client's computer. In that case, I didn't know about Schedule 36 at that point, HMRC's information inspection powers under Schedule 36. And by doing that case law research, I came across Schedule 36 and a bunch of different parts of that. So sometimes you might start with the legislation and think, I need some case law to help me interpret that. But in some circumstances, you might find the case law first and it will point out the relevant legislation for you, because cases do quote usually all the relevant legislation that are kind of at point in that case that are being disputed. So they will list, say, I don't know, 5 different sections of legislation, or a whole section, or a whole part, and sometimes they even like replicate it word for word in the case, so you can read it there in front of you, but they will at least reference it. And because I would say one of the most difficult things about doing tax research is making sure that you've covered all bases, that you've not missed any tax rules that are relevant or could impact your conclusion. Having a case that's already kind of listed all them for you in a certain case is only useful. It can give you more reassurance anyway that you found them all, even if you're looking at a case later on. Using case law whenever putting forward an argument anyway, whether it's the HMRC or a tribunal, etc., just bolsters your arguments all round. It's much stronger than just saying, this is my view. You can say, this is my view, and here it is backed up by a court case. It has a lot more gravitas to it than it would without that. And to be honest, I do just think anyway that being able to use tax case law, whether it's in your research or for any of the other reasons that we've talked about, will just make you a better tax professional, because it's getting you more involved in the tax side of things. And we are tax professionals at the end of the day. So being able to be savvy with the tax rules themselves, I think is important as a tax professional. And even if it's not something that you're particularly keen on, I do think it will make you a better tax professional. Summary then for this episode. These are 5 benefits of using tax case law as a tax professional. Number 1, tax case law can be very useful in improving a client's or taxpayer's position during HMRC inquiries. Number 2, case law allows you to provide better support to clients and taxpayers than you would be able to provide if you didn't use cases. Benefit 3 is that tax case law is an excellent way to improve your tax technical skills and ability. Benefit number 4 is that tax case law is a relatable and practical way to increase your tax technical knowledge. And benefit number 5 is that tax case law can take your tax research to the next level. If you want to become better at using case law or doing tax research more generally, then head on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/masterclasses to take a look at the Tax Research Masterclass, which is currently being delivered in Feb 2023. It's been created to give you and other tax professionals the practical skills to undertake quality tax research and then document it. There's an entire module on case law, and also there's modules on how to use legislation well. The show notes for this episode can be accessed at thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/TTPP65. That page includes all links and contact details mentioned throughout the episode, as well as links to other episodes related to tax research, including the one mentioned in the intro, episode 60, where 3 tax professionals share their experiences and tips to help you improve. To make sure you don't miss out on any future episodes that would help you to progress, develop and improve your tax career, then head on over to thetaxprofessionalspodcast.com/subscribe to sign up for email notifications. But that's it for this episode. I hope you found the episode useful and have taken away some helpful points to help you to progress, develop and improve your tax career. Until next time.